At the Xbox and Bethesda showcase last year, one particular game really caught my eye. There was a trailer for something called Dungeons of Hinterberg. The vibrant art style, that choppy and explosive combat, the beautiful views. I was just really curious to learn much more about the game, where its inspiration came from, everything. Well, now I can pretty much take you inside the game. Despite appearances and what I actually just said, I'm obviously not in the game, but I am in Bad Gastein in Austria to talk with Microbird Games about how it feels to play and also how Austrian culture has impacted not just the visuals of the game, but also various unexpected aspects of it too.
We've put a lot of love and energy and enthusiasm into it.
Yeah, and I think we're really excited to see what resonates with players.
So if you've been curious about Dungeons of Hinterberg, well, this is the video for you. So who's here in Austria with me today?
I'm Philip. I'm technical director on Dungeons of Hinterberg.
And I'm Regina. I'm the art director on the project.
And if you could you break it down for me and everyone else? What kind of game is Dungeons of Hinterberg?
So Dungeons of Hinterberg is a mix of action RPG and social sim. And it's set in the Austrian Alps, where there's this tiny village called Hinterberg, where a couple of years ago, 25 magical dungeons appeared out of nowhere. And these dungeons attract people from all over the world, adventurers, influencers, and just general oddballs. And they all want to go into those dungeons, slay monsters, get epic loot, all the good stuff.
So you play as Luisa, who's this young, kind of burnt out lawyer who's just sick of her city life and wants an escape. And so she comes to Hinterberg to have an adventure and experience magic.
So what's your typical day in Hinterberg like?
Yeah, you usually start out kind of on the terrace of your guest house. You just have a little breakfast that gives you a little perk. And then you decide which of the 4 biomes around Hinterberg to go to, like the mountain, the glacier, the swamp. And there you can basically explore. There's some combat, and this is where you can find the dungeon portals. Some are a bit more hidden, some you might have to gain access to somehow. And then, you can, of course, choose to go into a dungeon. Place in the evening, you're free to roam the village. There's different characters hanging out each day. You can do shopping, of course, and make some money, maybe sell some of the loot you found. And this is kind of then where the social simulation part is at its densest. And depending on who you hang out with, you might also unlock little gameplay systems. And these things are also kind of bound to the socializing. So it's all kind of connected together.
So it's definitely a game of two halves, right? There's the dungeons, where you can explore different biomes and fight vast arrays of enemies and bosses and solve puzzles. But there's also Hinterberg itself, where you can forge relationships with the different residents of the town. Now, we'll talk more about combat in more detail later on and how those two elements smash together. But first, I want to know, how do you put this into a game? To be clear, Hinterberg is not a real place in Austria. It's one you've had to design yourself, right?
Yeah, it's a mix of several places in Austria, and I would say in the Alpine space, like a bit of Bavaria, but mostly Austrian.
Like in 2020, when Philip and me kind of started to flesh out the concept and start on the game, we did a little tour through Austria and we visited several locations, Bad Gastein being one of the really influential ones, and Hallstatt, a bunch of others. And we just took a lot of pictures and looked at everything and really tried to capture the vibe kind of and the look of all kinds of Austrian places.
I think you make a big list of things you want to have in the game, things that sort of reflect your experience here and in other places. You collect all these little ideas, you filter them through how are we going to structure this, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense.
I mean, if I'm going to be buying a postcard while I'm here, this is probably the view you want, right?
Yeah.
We took inspirations from a lot of places. For example, we have a church with like a bell tower, but we also have a lake, which is not here, but inspired by places like Hallstatt. There's, of course, the inn, for example, on Main Square. And we've had people test who are also from Austria or who've been there on vacation. And even people are guessing what are they going to see. And we try to kind of pick the right kind of locations that you would expect and really nail the vibe kind of that comes out of it.
So I can see the beautiful country and I can see your game looking just as beautiful. What I don't understand is the steps in between. How do you get from looking at this, for example, and then turning that into a playable game?
We basically took a tiny piece of paper and put some post-its and tried to just distribute the interesting locations all throughout the areas of the town. And once we were kind of happy with having covered all that, we went directly to the engine and we did like some block outs and white boxes where basically you do simple shapes like a cube for a building, and we just built the streets. We checked how does it feel, how wide does the road have to be to feel good to run through. And only once you're happy, you really start doing the actual art. Like we referenced the pictures again. We looked at what kind of buildings are inspiring to us, what's the different architecture styles, the colors that are used a lot. And then we build the assets, and you usually start by like building the important assets first, like, I don't know, town hall or the guest house that Louisa, the player character, is staying in, the kind of not that important buildings in between. Philip built a kind of procedural generator in Unity where you could just say, okay, a house is that big and has that many floors and that kind of style of roof or something, and you can kind of generate it on the go for the like more backgroundy buildings. Really helps us as a really small team to like get through kind of building a whole little village. And yeah, you keep running through it, and it like looking good is kind of one part, but even more important is that it feels good, that players have good orientation, that they find everything important, that important places are not annoyingly far away from each other or something like that. And yeah, you kind of iterate over it again and again, and only when you're happy, then you, I don't know, do the details, like put up the trees or the little things, and you flesh it out. Yeah. Step by step, kind of.
Yeah, it's literally built like block by block.
Now, this is a location I think a lot of players are going to recognize as they get stuck into the game. I have to ask, seeing this and obviously having basically lived in Hinterberg now for 4 years, is it weird to be back in a town that's so inspirational for you?
It's surreal. It's extremely strange. Like so many spots here, random little spots that inform details of our game. And I mean, the waterfall here is obviously gorgeous and a big centerpiece, but you go to a random corner and you recognize something that you've just walked by every day for the last 4 years while you develop the game. It's a truly strange experience.
It's almost like you would feel like you would turn a corner here in Baggerstein and expect to see something in Hinterberg instead.
Something or someone. Yeah, for sure.
Now, if that's where the process were to end, then Microbird Games would have been left with a very beautiful ghost town. But I know for a fact that Hinterberg's got this real buzz about it, and it's thanks to the people who live there. But yapping with those residents is more important than you might think. You know, the more of Badgastein that I'm seeing, the more I can see more of the reflections of the game, Dungeons of Hinterberg, back into real life. I mean, in this restaurant, it almost imitates and takes inspiration a lot from the bar that you guys made in the game. Did you always consider that it was going to be a part of Dungeons of Hinterberg to have this downtime where you can just hang out in the community and speak to people?
This is where you're staying and you get to know all kinds of people. Like there's the locals, of course, people working at the inn or teenagers who grew up in this place that others go on vacation. And then there's just other tourists. There's like professional adventurers who do all these dungeons and are kind of famous. And you can hang out with all of them. Some of them might require you to get a certain kind of renown yourself before they hang out with you, or will only, party with you if you're amused enough. So there are these social stats.
At the core of it, we have all these social interactions. You have these relationship trees where you deepen your relationships with an NPC and you get perks or boons for that. And we like to think of those almost as kind of a skill tree. So you might unlock either more HP or MP, but it can also go so far as to unlock entire gameplay systems like a combo counter or photo mode, for example, is something you get as a reward for becoming friends with someone.
It's such an interesting way of communicating a skill tree, because other games I've played, you earn a skill point and you just pop it into some diagram, and I don't really feel a connection for like a learned new ability or whatever it is. But forging relationships with other people, that is like real life skill tree, because you learn from other people's relationships, and it's not until you've done that you do progress and become more of what you used to be. And that's a really clever way of being able to communicate that to players, and I think they're going to connect with it straight away. Are any of them based on people that you know, or of people you've encountered in real life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the one hand, there's a lot of inspiration that we've drawn from this place, from Bad Gastein, random things that happened. We had an Australian waitress, like a student who would work here part-time over the summer just to sort of fund her vacation. And we have a character like that as well. So a lot of the characters in the game come from sort of amalgamations of random observations. And then, of course, a lot of it comes from, people we personally know as well.
So that's Hinterberg, but what about the dungeons? They're chock full of all these puzzles and a variety of enemies that are just crying out to get smashed with Louisa's great big sword, but they also contain something that I've never seen in a video game dungeon before. There's one thing that struck me as a little odd, and maybe you can clear it up for me, but why do you collect a stamp at the end of a dungeon? Is that a reference to something, or?
It comes from hiking routes. Like it's a thing that you have a little stamp book where when you complete a hike and you go along an official route, you get a little stamp at the end.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Well, I mean, that's at the end of the dungeon, so why don't we step back a bit and maybe you can break down your philosophy on designing dungeons as well then? Do you theme them around something in particular, or do you work backwards and try and figure out a way that you can steer the player through that dungeon?
It's a lot of different lenses, so to speak, starting with the biome and with just the kind of environment you're in. That's definitely one big aspect. And how do we make these biomes that we create for the dungeons work? What can we do inside them? Then there's also kind of an approach to it that's based on having different beats inside a dungeon, having like an exploration beat, a combat beat, a puzzle beat, sort of having variety in there, making players see something unexpected.
I remember there was this one part in particular where I'd learned this new magic skill and instantly I could see its value for combat. I was like, great, I'm going to weave this into my attacks, it's going to be a lot of fun. But then very quickly after I discovered that actually there's a whole puzzle element to it too, and its utility became even more fascinating to me. And so now whenever I'm finding a new magic skill, I'm not thinking, oh yeah, great combat. I'm actually maybe thinking puzzle first. That's a really cool way to design things.
Yeah, I think it was very nice creative work for us as well to see which skills kind of resonate with which biome. For example, you start out in the mountain biome, and the associated dungeons are kind of a bit more realistic than the others. Still in the beginning, they're kind of mines. If you are in the ice wonderland dungeons, I'm gonna call them, that are associated with the glacier, you have this magic hoverboard, for example, and you can move much faster, and the biomes and the dungeon themes and the skills really just go very well together, I think.
You'll have noticed by now that Louisa is carrying around I believe this is a technical term, bloody massive sword. Dungeons of Hinterberg's combat is primarily pleasingly crunchy melee, but it also has some hidden tricks up its sleeve too. It's really obvious based on her design that Louisa's obviously carrying a big sword around, which means that combat is primarily that melee focused. Hinterberg though is a town of magic, and I do wonder, do players get to indulge a bit in the magic side of it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, she always wields a sword, but then you always have 2 magic skills per biome, so they change. And these can be used for puzzling, for exploration. Some of them are means of transportation, but they always also have a function in combat. And then you have a bunch of other additional systems. For example, there's these kind of special attacks that we call attack conduits that are slotable, so you can kind of find them, buy them throughout the game. Some are gifted by other characters, and you can choose whatever you like best and equip that in combat. So it's a kind of special magic skills. And we have a thing called charms, which gives you little, often indirect boosts. Some of them more combat focused, some of them have other perks. But you can kind of, build your Louisa depending on what's most fun for you and what you like using the most.
But what about those beasties that you're smacking about the place in search of that stamp? They feel pretty unique too. Turns out they're inspired by Austrian culture as well. We were literally walking around Baggerstein and saw these creepy figures that looked eerily similar to something that was in the game. Is that yet another area of this game that has been inspired by the research you've done, and also the identity of Alpine mythology in Austria?
Yeah, a lot of the inspiration from those came from Alpine mythology and from sort of the Krampus tradition, or Perchtenläufe, which means that in December there's this tradition where people dress up as terrifying monsters and roam the streets. And the Krampus is the most famous of those, but there's like a real treasure trove of weird and wacky and strange creatures. Some are terrifying, others are just really, really odd. And Like a lot of the enemies in the game come straight from that.
And they are not really out to maybe get you specifically, but they appeared with magic, and they have this playful, even sometimes way of fighting against you, kind of. And we just looked through a lot of the local mythologies and some characters that we knew already and some not, and tried to think how are they described in mythology, and how could that be in a video game? Like what they do, how they behave. We have these little guys called Pitzel, for example. It's just a really small creature with a big yellow head, and they are kind of these kobold guys. They are not evil, but they are pesky. They might play tricks of you in mythology. Yeah, they're mischievous. There's also another creature. It's called a Hobangors. It's a kind of goat, and you can see people in costumes that have this artificially long neck and then a kind of goat's head. So it looks really weird to start out with in kind of real life, and we thought, okay, we have to have this kind of creature in game. And for us, we made this goat with a long neck, and its special attack is that the neck, kind of like with an ostrich, goes into the ground and the head comes up somewhere else and tries to hit you. So it's just really fun, creative stuff that you can just take one step further. It's already weird as it is, and then you can make it a bit weirder even in the mechanic.
Let's remember that Microbird, they're a brand new studio, and Dungeons of Hinterberg is their very first game. And it's no secret that making games is really complex. So I wanted to learn about the challenges they faced during development, or what mountains they climbed. Yeah? Get it? And it's just such a beautiful way to travel. I mean, I don't envy everyone that's hiking up. I'm sure it's also beautiful, but this is certainly the easy way to do it. I love that this is also something that you included in the game. Was that always the vision, to have cable cars as this sort of transportation narrative sort of thing that you've included?
Yeah, this was one of the first places that we visited when we started looking for inspiration for Dungeons of Hinterberg, and I don't think we could ever get used to this either. It's just a spectacular view.
It's kind of the quintessential way to go up on a mountain. It's a cable car, and everyone associates it with the Alps and with mountains.
This is Microbird's first game. And so, to me, I always see that the first game a studio puts out, it's really important that they use that to almost set the identity of what they want their studio to be going forward. So would you say that Dungeons of Hinterberg, that's become the perfect way for you to craft your studio's like DNA and their identity?
An important thing to us in the games that we want to make is that we present you with places that feel real, that you can, inhabit for a little while. That's something that we find fascinating about games, the idea that you can just be in a different place for a while. And so I think something like this and bringing that to a game, that was pretty important for us as a first title for our studio.
I know from all the people that I've spoken to about game development that it's brilliant, obviously, but they also introduce the challenges. So what sort of challenges have there been for making Dungeons of Hinterberg, especially with a smaller team?
So working with a small team, there are some challenges. Like for us, it was really important to define kind of the vision and what we want from the game and the vibe really early on. And then, of course, during development, you find that some things work well and others not. But just have a kind of goal, what you want players to experience and feel. And we also picked an art style, for example, that can be done with a small team. Like it's a very distinct and I would say unique kind of art style, but it's one that can be done very efficiently. Like we don't aim for realism or anything. We can kind of work a bit faster, work much more expressive than we have to, would have to if we went for realism, for example. And so it's a lot. We also have a lot of people who can do more than one thing. So people really know kind of what's the goal and what's the style, and they can, just find efficient ways to kind of get there.
It's evocative of these kind of beautiful landscapes. It's not one-to-one. It's you have taken the inspiration and turned it into something new and vibrant and fresh. And anyone can look at this and see it's beautiful.
Yeah.
But it's like it's beautiful in a real world sense. But I find the magic of Dungeons of Hinterberg is in that it is a more fantastical realization even of this, which sort of seems impossible because it's so beautiful. Like, how can it get better? But then I see it through your game realized really well, and it's an amazing experience. So and then going on this view is not too bad either. That is what it's all about.
Yeah, it's really nice. We put similar spots in the game, like just scenic spots where you can stay for a day and just kind of chill and relax and think about your life.
It's not too long now until launch, obviously, which is a bit scary maybe to think of. But ultimately, what do you hope players get out of Dungeons of Hinterberg when they finally get hands-on with it?
I would love for them to take away the experience of having, been to a place that felt kind of real, this idea that you're playing a game, and of course there's fantasy elements and there's magical things, but you're also sort of inhabiting a place that's rooted in reality.
Yeah, and I think we're really excited to see what resonates with players, because there's a lot of kind of different things you can focus. You can socialize a lot or do dungeons a lot. You can do a more chill experience or do a real challenge of how fast can I get through all these dungeons. So I think we're really excited to see which characters are popular or not so popular, which kind of social rewards do people go after, how ambitious are they or how relaxed are they in their approach. So this is something that's going to be super interesting for us, I think.
You know, this has been a really interesting trip here to Bad Gastein, but my next trip's probably going to be straight back into Hinterberg. You guys are going to be able to take your vacation from July 18th, day one on Xbox Game Pass, by the way. So if you want to learn more about this game or any interesting Xbox games that are coming up, be sure to subscribe and, hey, maybe we'll go on a trip together. See you next time. Auf Wiedersehen.